This past summer, Square Enix revealed Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, and I didn't think much of it, outside of believing it would be a cool game to enjoy casually this fall. I was stunned to see this massive company dedicate so much time to what seemed like a relatively small game when compared with the monoliths they house. Sure, the Guardians IP has gained a lot of traction in recent years, but allotting so much of your limited time to a game reveal on this? It seemed crazy, especially to me, a guy who's never jived with the Guardians. Despite the universal acclaim for the MCU's take on this ragtag group of space protectors, the movies haven't really resonated much with me outside of some surface level enjoyment. And I expected something similar from this game. A solid experience that wouldn't have much staying power in my mind as the days went by. But boy was I wrong. When a game is able to take a set of characters who've never interested you much and make you care about them, well, then you're onto something great. And let me tell you, this game is great. What jumps out immediately from this title is the writing and characterization of the Guardians, as they absolutely are the heart and soul of this experience. Despite the intriguing world building and the captivating main plot, these 5 characters define the experience and will leave you wanting more in the best way. And while the rich story and memorable characters steal the show, the combat is no slouch either, as it provides pure fun with its wonderfully coordinated and well choreographed systems. A true sense of harmony exists between the gameplay and the story, as the events unfolding have a tangible impact on your capabilities in combat. And on top of that, your voice as a player doesn't go unheard, as a plentiful number of dialogue decisions are offered up as well. And while all of this goodness is taking place, the player is also gifted incredible vistas and views to soak up, as there's no shortage of breathtaking moments to admire. Eidos-Montreal had a crystal clear concept for where they wanted this game to go, and they executed on that vision in a masterful way. I can't wait to tell you more, so welcome to my critique of Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy. By far, the defining trait of Guardians of the Galaxy is its story, its world building, and most importantly, its characters. So let's start with that. I've given a lot of story spoiler warnings in videos this year, but this is the one that I mean the most. Seriously, if you have any interest in this game, go play it. I'll be revealing all the twists and turns of the plot, so you've been warned. Of course, if you do decide to stay, it's important to note that while the events of the plot are gripping and entertaining, the real emphasis is placed on the characters, both their strengths and their struggles, and how each of them is able to grow so that they can unite as a team, and more importantly, as a family. So with that, let's recap the story. The events of the game begin with the newly formed Guardians of the Galaxy, comprised of Peter Quill, aka Star-Lord, Drax the Destroyer, Gamora, Rocket, and Groot, venturing to a quarantine zone to capture a monster to profit from. In true Guardians fashion, this ragtag group of broken people bicker and argue with one another a lot. It's immediately obvious that Quill is doing his best to keep the gang together, as Rocket's brash attitude, the distrust of Gamora from Drax, and the inability to communicate with Groot have all caused divides amongst the gang. At this point in the story, they seem to tolerate each other as co-workers, but refuse to function as a single unit. Within this quarantine zone, Quill stumbles across and frees a pulsating entity from what is later revealed to be the Soul Stone. This creature eviscerates everything in its path and escapes into the deeper parts of the quarantine zone. The gang also finds a llama creature and decides on taking it back to their ship to sell to Lady Hellbender. On their way out, the gang is arrested and fined by Nova Corps, where Peter is reunited with a former lover named Corel and her daughter Nikki. It's later hinted at that Nikki very well could be Peter's daughter. A man named Raker has also been captured by Nova Corps, and a prison break is conducted to free him, which traps Peter and Nikki for a while. The two are able to bond before peace is restored, and the Guardians are free to go with a hefty fine to pay. The gang continues to fight as they question Quill's leadership and how they will raise so much money in so little time. Over the next few chapters, the gang attempts to collect units by selling either Rocket or Groot to Lady Hellbender, the monster collector I mentioned earlier, and then pay their fine with it. They eventually gather the money they need, but make new enemies in the process. The first 5 or 6 chapters of the game really establish how broken the relationship is between the Guardians, and it comes to a spearhead when Quill almost gets the gang killed by a group of Nova Corps that appear to be brainwashed. Having failed to pay their fine, the group heads to nowhere to try to find someone who can remove the tracker, which will disable their ship in a set number of days. The tension is palpable between Rocket and Quill, so much so that the former leaves with Groot, abandoning the team as they arrive on Nowhere. Even Drax and Gamora split away from Peter for a time to collect their thoughts, and this represents the gang at their lowest. The group is eventually captured by Cosmo, Nowhere's founder, who informs them that what they stumbled upon at the abandoned Nova Corps HQ is actually quite an issue. It appears that this brainwashing is happening all over the galaxy. It's being spearheaded by the Universal Church of Truth and its leader, Grand Unifier Raker, who we briefly encountered earlier. Out of necessity, the Guardians are forced to work together again to try to stop the Church. This eventually leads to an encounter with its leader, Raker, who attempts to lure the Guardians onto his side. He promises that joining the Church and accepting the promise will lead to the end of their pain and suffering, and for them to be reunited with their loved ones. In a shocking twist, Nikki is revealed to be the matriarch channeling all the faith energy that's being harvested from the brainwashed people. It's unclear why she's doing this, but it is clear that Raker's involvement has played a hand in her undoing. Nikki attempts to brainwash the Guardians by showing them their individual promises. These are utopias where they can live happy lives free of the pain they endure. In his promise, Peter is reunited with his mother as they and his fellow Guardians enjoy living amongst each other at his home on Earth. This cycle continues until the player breaks out of it, and it's a really cool moment. After freeing themselves from their promises, the defeated Guardians return to their ship, but they're unable to have stopped the Church. On top of that, they now need to save Nikki as well, and the team dynamic is still fractured. At some point, Drax begins to show signs of being brainwashed, and as time passes, he gets fully entranced by the Matriarch's promise to be reunited with his fallen wife and daughter. Quill rallies the remaining Guardians to help save Drax with the help of Mantis, and it's this section of the story that provides the largest turning point for the Guardians. Within these mystical caves, the team bonds and come closer together as they all show signs of growth and resolve to save Drax. It's done subtly too, with clever writing, much better than I'm conveying here. Along with the help of Adam Warlock, Drax is freed from his mental imprisonment and reclaims his free will. From there, the gang makes more attempts to save Nikki, but is unable to do so. After breaking out of his promise earlier, Quill witnessed Nikki's, where Ko-Rel pleaded with him to free Nikki from the beast that's controlling her. This creature is revealed to be Magus, the beast that Quill accidentally freed from the Soul Stone at the beginning of the game. And if it goes unstopped, the creature is capable of brainwashing the entire galaxy, eliminating all free will, and consuming everything in its path with its new army. The Guardians become a lot closer during this time mentally and spiritually, but they're in need of an impressive physical victory to truly bring them together. And they get this moment after defeating the legendary dragon Fin Fang Foom to get Lady Hellbender to lend her monster army to them to bring down the Church. In the game's final chapters, the Guardians confront Raker, Nikki, and Magus to stop the madness. If Quill is able to get through to Nikki, she can reject Magus, and as the primary host of this creature, doing so will cut off all the other parts of it that brainwash everyone else. After fighting through countless members of the church's army, Peter is able to infiltrate Nikki's promise and talk her down in an emotional scene. This allows Nikki to break free of Magus and unlock new powers. Meanwhile, Raker attempts to harness control of the Faith energy for himself. After defeating him in battle, Warlock absorbs Magus back into himself, and the galaxy is saved. The Guardians take a victory lap and are heralded as saviors, and then the credits roll. Until they stop rolling. Warlock's attempt to reabsorb Magus didn't go as planned, and the Guardians must defeat him in one final confrontation before sealing him away in the Soul Stone for good. This finally brings about the end of the story, and I'm sure my recap doesn't give it all the respect it deserves, as it functions only as a recount of the basic events of the plot. It's no more impactful than reading a Wikipedia plot summary of a movie you haven't seen. In other words, you might feel like this really isn't anything special. Well, that brings me back to what I said at the beginning of this section. The game's plot is interesting enough to hold your attention, but it's the characters that will truly make you adore this title. This narrative is about a group of broken people coming together to form a family. The characters are done justice in this game while also opening themselves up to be emotionally resonant with the player. By the end, you're going to see them in a new light. It's one of those rare instances where the writing, characters, and themes gel so perfectly that the illusion of them being real people instead of game characters is never shattered. And what I'd like to do now is share the 6 steps the game takes to accomplish this incredible feat. It starts with the characterization. To have characters interact with each other in meaningful ways, you must first establish characters that are interesting on their own. A lot of the legwork has already been accomplished by the comic books, but this title was able to bring these characters to life in a way that resonated with me far more than in any other medium I've encountered them in before. Peter Quill comes from a broken family in which he never knew his father and his mother was killed. This group of heroes is much more than co-workers to him. It's family, even if they don't see it that way. His struggles to keep the gang together in the early stages of the game is palpable, and seeing him grow into a leader that they respect over the course of the game was very impactful. Besides him though, each character has their own distinct personalities with strengths and weaknesses. Rocket is quick-tempered and spiteful, but occasionally will show a softer side, especially around Groot. Speaking of the giant tree, he's only able to say, "I am Groot." But enough is done with his facial animations, body posture, and tone that the spirit of what he's saying is able to come through. Drax is a brilliant character, as his strength, discipline, and heart come through in every interaction, but he's also able to serve as the comic relief in a non-traditional way. He takes everything literally, and so many expressions of Earth are given funny twists when he reacts to them. And finally, Gamora is distant at first, but is cautiously optimistic about making this group work. Each character can stand tall on their own, and this means when they come together, magic can happen. Our second ingredient in this recipe for story success is simply the presence that each character brings to any individual moment. Naturally, cutscenes provide us up-close and personal encounters with each character that allows the plot to move forward and the interactions between each to shine. However, it's their spirit in the moment-to-moment gameplay that furthers the game's efforts to make you care. Whether it's in combat or in exploration, the group members will constantly comment on their surroundings, the decisions of the player, or even react to one another. Not only does this cleverly hide some gameplay sections that may be a bit dull, but it provides more moments of interaction, humor, and characterization where you wouldn't normally find them, and this really helps endear the characters to the player. They are always with you, and you really feel that, And so when a character runs off to be on their own, you feel their absence more because the dialogue they would have contributed in those moments is gone. Thirdly, the balance between moments of humor and of emotion is extremely well done in this game. So often in MCU movies, serious moments of emotion are undercut by forced humor. I'd point to the scene in Avengers Infinity War where Quill and Gamora share a tender moment only for Drax to show up and do his invisible bit. Sure, it's funny, but the emotion of the moment is lessened. This game doesn't repeat those mistakes. Moments of emotion are not only made prominent, but they are allowed time to simmer and sink in. Take this moment here on Nowhere, in which Drax opens up about the grief he feels towards the loss of his family. It's a powerful moment where the Titan Killer admits that this location, on the edge of the universe, is where he's able to feel his lost wife and daughter the most. It's the closest he can get to them in this lifetime.
No one should die without meaning, Peter Quill. My wife, Hovat, and my daughter, Camaria. They died without meaning.
I think I know what you mean, man.
It's heartfelt and fleshes out this character more, and there's plenty of moments like this throughout the game. However, it's not all sappy all the time. The writing in this game is phenomenal and shines in all places, but perhaps nowhere more than in the humor. This was the first legitimately funny game I've played in a long time, and a lot of the jokes made me laugh out loud. For example, there's a scene where the ground shakes beneath the group's feet, and someone comments that it feels like an earthquake. And Drax responds by saying, "Not likely, seeing as we aren't on Earth." I love that, it's funny, and there's plenty of good humor like this throughout the experience. So what we have here is a perfect blend between emotion and humor, two of the quickest ways to get humans to connect with characters, and it's done so masterfully here. So to recap, so far we have well-realized characters and a strong presence from them, mixed with moments of humor and emotion. So what's missing? A theme to tie it all together, but don't worry, Guardians delivers that too. Thematically, this game is about family and what that exactly means. It's about the struggles that families come up against and how they must set aside their differences when one of their own is in trouble. We feel this theme not only in the relationship between Quill and his ex and potential daughter, but most importantly in the relationship between the Guardians. We see them transition from estranged to loving one another in a way that isn't forced or sudden, it's a gradual growth. The first half of the game sees the gang almost split many times, with Rocket and Groot going so far as to leave the team for a short period of time. But there's other smaller moments where the dysfunction shows, such as the fighting between Drax and Gamora in the first mission of the game, or how Rocket believes they should abandon Gamora after failing to locate her following a confrontation with Raker. Things begin to change though when one of their own falls victim to the Church. Drax's change of heart is what prompts the Guardians to come together as a family and learn to look after each other. Overcoming the trials and tribulations the gang goes against in the mystical caves creates a deeper bond between them that is felt by the player, and it begins to sow the seeds of connection. And in the final third of the game, we see this family theme come through stronger than ever as the gang works together to take down Fin Fang Foom and stop the Church of Truth. And in the final missions of the game, Quill demonstrates what he's learned about family. Even after learning that Nikki is not his biological daughter, he still comes to view her as one of his own. He forms a meaningful connection and bond with her and allows her to join the team following their victory. This theme of what it means to be a family is simple, but it's baked into every component of the narrative and the plot that unfolds, and it's wonderful to be quite honest. But we still have two components left to discuss. The fifth reason for why this story and characters work so well has to do with Eidos-Montreal's decision to make Peter Quill the only playable character. There was a lot of backlash during the game's announcement that you couldn't control Drax, Rocket, Groot, or Gamora during combat, but after finishing the game, it's pretty clear why they went in this direction. Quill serves as an anchor point for the theme to orbit around. We see the events of the game mostly through his perspective, and this grounding allows the other characters to feel like beings of their own. With us unable to take control of them, they're able to stand up for themselves, make their own decisions, share their inputs, and grow on their own with our support, but not our direct control. This sense of agency within each character and the divorce of the player's direct input on their decisions helps them flourish into meaningful and impactful people who stand on their own. To me, this is perhaps the most underappreciated component of the game. The developers knew that relinquishing control to the players would compromise on their vision for this game, and so they stuck to their guns despite the immediate backlash they receive from people who just wanted to play as Drax. This dedication is admirable, and in the end, it really worked out for this title. Now, you might think that this results in Peter Quill's character being sacrificed since we control him, but that isn't the case either. He has a personality of his own, and his prominence in the story encourages the player to make the same decisions that he would. This is helped further by the fact that many dialogue options either skew towards supporting the theme of family or come off as complete opposites of it. It feels so natural to choose the options that encourage teamwork and unity because this is the perspective that Quill represents in the gang. And this approach doesn't even sacrifice decision making as you might think it does. In other words, if the player is heavily encouraged to choose certain dialogue options to reflect Quill's beliefs, then is there really a choice? Well, yes, because there's plenty of other moments in which you interact with characters who don't tie into the theme. And your choices in these moments have consequences for how story events play out later. They are minor, but they do exist. So all in all, making Quill the focal point was the correct decision for this game. And that leads me into my final point for how the game succeeds in its storytelling. The ebbs and flow of the story have real gameplay implications which magnifies their impact. When characters temporarily leave the team, such as Rocket and Groot leaving on Nowhere, or Gamora going off on her own to fight Raker, or Drax being brainwashed, you feel their absence in the gameplay just as much as in the story. They aren't there to make the quips, but they also aren't there to lend their abilities in combat. Some of these attacks are super useful too, as each character serves a different role while fighting. So when you need someone to stagger a large enemy, and Drax is unavailable to do so, you feel that absence much more. It's tied together wonderfully. And so all of this is to say that Eidos-Montreal had a true vision for how to go about this story, and they navigated the challenges of telling it with good writing, style, humor, and most importantly, purpose. It results in a game that endears you to the characters and invests you fully into the events taking place, much more so than in any other game I experienced this year. But of course, we still have a lot to discuss in terms of the gameplay, so let's transition into a look at the combat. The combat system is based on a third-person action model with an added emphasis on commanding companions to dish out extra attacks. You play as Peter Quill, whose abilities are centered mostly around ranged attacks from his elemental guns. This allows the player character to hang back in combat encounters and dish out punishment from a distance, but it also allows for a surveying of the battlefield. And this enhanced vision allows the player to better decide on how their companions should attack on the battlefield. Certain tactics and abilities will work better against some enemies versus others, so being able to identify them quickly was a must. And while playing as Quill, it's as easy as can be. Each of your fellow companions also specializes in combat roles to allow for additional combat management from the player. For example, Gamora is a high damage character who can dish out massive punishment with a single blow. Groot is all about stunning enemies and stopping them in their tracks to allow for a breather. On top of that, he also has healing capabilities. Rocket is a ranged character who's capable of dealing out pain with his explosives, and Drax focuses on staggering foes, which opens them up to increased damage. Each companion, along with Star-Lord, has abilities that can be unlocked using experience points and function on a cooldown. These abilities are varied enough to provide tactical advantages, but they also maintain the character's combat roles. It's well balanced, and as I mentioned earlier, it allows each character's presence or absence to be felt much more. On easy and normal difficulties, you can be pretty liberal with unloading these abilities however you want, but on more challenging modes, you need to be more tactical. This allows for a first playthrough to be casual and fun, but later runs on higher difficulties can be made more engaging because of the strategy that's required. Besides this though, there's other elements sprinkled in for added flair. As you progress the story, Star-Lord unlocks new elemental attacks for his guns that are effective against different enemy types. For example, far away enemies can be pulled in with your wind attack, and groups of enemies can be hit all at once with electric shots that chain. It adds variety to your arsenal while also providing different utilities depending on the enemy type you're facing. There's also a series of upgrades that can be purchased, but these are relatively simple, such as extra health, extra stamina, a charge shot, and more. Another interesting inclusion is the Huddle Up mechanic, in which Star-Lord rallies the team with a rousing speech that provides a temporary buff in combat. Based on what the Guardians are telling you, you must choose the right dialogue option to raise their spirits and motivate them in battle. Choosing correctly buffs everyone, while choosing poorly only buffs you. These were super helpful to break out in difficult combat encounters, and they helped turn the tide of battle, which felt incredible. And it doesn't hurt that the music shifts to one of Star-Lord's iconic 60s, 70s, and 80s hits, either. I'm a sucker for that kind of music, so yeah, I loved it. But these huddle-ups, they do slow the pace of combat down a tad, but honestly, they were worth including because of how they can alter the course of a battle and how they tie in thematically with working as a cohesive team. The enemy variety is also on point, as every planet you visit offers up a new breed of foes to fight, from alien animals, funky blobs, and possessed humans. Each type of enemy also has an optimal way to bring it down, which again allows for the tactical side of combat to flourish. And visually, they are fun and unique to look at, which never hurts. The boss encounters also followed similar suit and provided a great deal of spectacle to combat. But more than anything else, this combat system was purely fun, and it's a feeling that many games struggle to find. The atmosphere and abilities provided a great deal of enjoyment, and despite being relatively simple overall, enough elements were included to flesh out these systems and provide a cohesive experience. My only real complaint within the combat system is simply that it worked against the game's pacing at times. There are 2 or 3 chapters in this game where the combat really dragged on for a while. A handful of times, I found myself wondering when this was gonna wrap up, only for the game to throw more waves of enemies at me. It seemed a little bit overkill at times. This reflected in the upgrade system too, as I was only about 75% of the way through the main story when I unlocked the final ability. The game had thrown so many long combat sections at me that I no longer had any use for experience points, which was a bummer. I enjoyed the combat, don't get me wrong, but there were times where I was ready to get back to the story, and the game just wasn't yielding. Still, overall, I had a great time with it. When you aren't out and about fighting with your teammates, you'll be exploring some of the most iconic outposts from the Guardians universe, such as Nowhere and Nova Corps HQ. You might think that using the word exploration in a game as linear as this might be a disservice, but I think it's the right term based on how unique these worlds feel and how every corner of them have been packed with detail, small puzzles, character interactions, and collectibles. The most gamey of these would be the small puzzles. So just like in combat, each Guardian has an ability that can be used to navigate the environment. Groot can create bridges, Gamora can throw you to higher ledges, Drax can move around platforms, and Rocket can hack terminals to grant access to locked areas. Often these abilities are used as one-offs, where the player must simply enter the command to have the desired action take place. Occasionally though, the game will require multiple abilities to be used in a specific order to create a very simple puzzle. They aren't much, but at least it's another way to promote the teamwork theme. And speaking of that, after becoming a more cohesive unit after saving Drax, the Guardians will often complete these tasks without you having to command them to do so. Everyone's on the same page now, which means you don't have to boss them around as much as you did before. It's the story showing up in the gameplay. Like I mentioned in the story section, these moments of explorational downtime are mostly to provide more moments with the characters, but there's gameplay elements to consider as well. Many levels have short branching paths where the player can earn collectibles, such as new outfits for the Guardians, codex entries with written lore, and items that can lead to new conversations back on the Milano. The character interactions really come into play during these sections, whether it's by granting one-on-one conversations with a Guardian, or having them mock you for going off the beaten path. The latter of these serves as a wink and nod to that video game thing where you go off the intended path to find a collectible. Instead of just waiting for you like a typical NPC, the Guardians comment on how strange it is that you're going down that unnecessary path like a real person would. It contributes to that sense of presence I talked about earlier. When you're not venturing through alien planets, you'll most likely be chilling on the Milano, where you can engage in interesting conversations with the Guardians. There's plenty of story-related conversations, but there's also items that you can find in the world that unlock unique dialogue with individual characters, and it helps fleshes them out more. I love when games do this sort of thing. And finally, there's the decisions you make throughout the game while playing as Quill that can have a consequence on later events. They're lighter versions of what you may find in a Telltale game. For example, early in the game, you'll have to choose to either eject the alien llama you found in the quarantine zone, or the illegal tech you've been storing. I chose to keep the alien llama aboard, and later on, he had damaged the ship enough that I was able to escape my room after being locked in. Alternatively, there was an encounter with the world mine in which I talked it into doubting its belief that the church couldn't be stopped. By doing this, the omnipotent entity showed up during the game's conclusion and helped clear a path to the final boss, making things easier. It's relatively simple stuff, but I love how these decisions didn't compromise on Peter's character tendencies while also carrying some meaning for future events. All in all, the gameplay of Guardians was exactly what it needed to be. A series of simple ideas executed very well. It also was keen on finding ways to incorporate the events of the story directly into it through consequential decisions and the absence of companions in combat. It was no doubt a very enjoyable set of systems to navigate and experience. Finally, we come to the game's presentation, and I'm surprised I've been able to go this long talking about this game without mentioning its incredible aesthetics, planet design, and soundtrack. This game's presentation is incredible at almost all times, as Eidos-Montreal clearly knew that they had designed some immaculate visuals. With that being said though, most of the game's issues, as minor as they may be, crop up in the presentation and need to be addressed here. But let's start with the good. So, there's been a crime. That's right. It is a crime that Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy was not up for consideration in the category of art direction in this year's Game Awards. I played Kena Bridge of Spirits and Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, which are both nominees, and I'd say this game's art direction is much better than Kena's, while being on the same level as Rift Apart. And I'm not trying to take anything away from those games. Kena is beautiful, and I loved it, and so was Rift Apart. But I mean seriously, check out some of these vistas. Take note of the rich color palette and how different everything looks from any game we've seen this year. There might not be as much richness in the details as in other games, but the overall cohesiveness of the art direction is stellar. There's been a lot of games this year that have managed to make me stop and take in the view, but none more so than this one. The scale of these planets also makes you pause with admiration, as it's quite easy to feel small while moving through these alien biomes. I couldn't wait to see what secrets and views each planet would hold, and they never disappointed me throughout the game. It's awe-inspiring, and it always looked incredible. Another awesome inclusion is the choice of music that accompanies the game. We naturally have a bunch of hits from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, which are a core feature of Star-Lord's personality. I'm also a sucker for music from this era, so I can't help but to smile at most of the song selections in this regard. But the game's OST was also handled very well. The developers decided to base the Star-Lord alias off of a fictional band, and decided that this game's soundtrack should be an album from that band. So they got to work assembling a group of music talent that could perform heavy metal rock music that would play throughout this game. This group became known as Star-Lord's Band, and their hit song, We're Space Riders with No Names, serves as the game's primary original song. It's meant to resemble the Guardians themselves, as its lyrics are about a gang of space travelers who seek adventure. It fits very well with Peter Quill, the Guardians themselves, and the journey they go on throughout this game. So yeah, the music was bangin', and I'm glad to see the game getting recognition as a nominee for this in the Game Awards. And another nod needs to be given to the voice actors, because there really isn't anything bad within the entire game. The 5 Guardians are portrayed perfectly, and the supporting cast is strong as well. There's a lot of different styles of spoken language in this game. Each character has unique inflections, accents, and manners of speech that make them feel distinct without dropping quality across the board. Whoever did the casting for these characters did a fantastic job, as did the performers. And before we tackle some of the game's presentational issues, I did want to make a quick note of the character designs. This game did receive some flack for its depiction of Peter Quill, but honestly, it's not nearly as bad as it was in Marvel's Avengers. Those characters look generic as all hell, but to me, Quill and the rest of the Guardians look alright here. So to wrap this section up, I wanted to briefly go over some of the game's technical issues. To me, these are the only real points of criticism I can lobby against the game, outside of the occasional pacing issues. None of them are deal breakers to the experience, but they clash so much with the amazing visuals that I couldn't help but to notice them whenever they happened. So let me list them off. When conversing with characters on the Milano, Quill doesn't blink. He looks possessed and animatronic in these scenes, which robs the moment of some of its impact. And within these moments, as well as other cutscenes, the lip syncing is off at times, which doesn't look good. And during fights, lines of dialogue are often repeated within the same fight, which got pretty annoying after some time. And finally, I did have one instance where my team did a finisher move, which ended with my companions stuck in a wall. They tried their darndest to run out of that wall and back to me, but they never did make it, which forced a hard restart. Again, none of these issues are major flaws of the experience or anything like that. A few patches could clean these problems up and make the game even better than it already is. Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy is one of those special sorts of games, where the stars align and every component of game design, combat, storytelling, characterization, writing, and presentation come together in perfect harmony. It's clear that the developers at Eidos-Montreal had a deep passion for this IP. What could have been a cash grab on the part of Square Enix instead found ways to tell a Guardian story that honors the source material and builds on it in interesting and creative ways. The combat system started off relatively simple, but continued to build on itself as the story unfolded. Despite dragging on a few times, I never got tired of the rhythms of fighting. On top of that, there's moments in this game that are going to stick with me for a while. whether that's from the conversations I was a part of or the beautiful views that they provided. For me personally, games are easiest to connect with when the characters in them can keep my disbelief suspended and endear me to them through humor, moments of emotion, and flaws that help inform their growth. And Guardians of the Galaxy hit a home run on this front. Hopefully, I've been able to convey why that is through the course of this critique. As I said at the beginning of the video, I expected to enjoy this game for a while and then move on, given my lack of interest in the IP. Yet, somehow, this game left me wanting more in the best way possible. I would be thrilled to see this game get a sequel and to see where the team could take this combat system and characters next. There's a whole universe to explore out there, so why not give them a second outing? Regardless of if we get that or not, Guardians of the Galaxy is one of the finest games I played in 2021, and I highly recommend checking it out. Seriously, there's no fancy one-liner to wrap this critique up. This is it. I'm keeping it simple. Go out and play this game. You'll thank me later. Trust me. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out my critique of Guardians of the Galaxy. If you've played the game, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, especially to hear who your favorite Guardian was. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing for more, follow me on Twitter at NopNapNarp, and as always, have a nice day, and take care.